Good morning. Let's get kicked off here. It's actually really good to be back. I see a lot of familiar faces from last year. A lot of new faces too. Now, unfortunately, last year we had a little fun talk about UX and design. This year, I kind of have a more serious thing to talk about. Let's start with a quick sanity check. How many times, when did you last hear this? Or when did you last hear that? Or when did you last do that? I guess we're all guilty about how we operate, and have you ever sat down once in a while and thought to yourself, are we really doing ourselves justice? Are we doing this right? Is it okay? I understand there's a bit of cowboy enthusiasm when it comes to code, but is this okay? Hold that thought. I used to work at a school and a hospital, and one of the first things you learn is although you're a developer at a school, you don't have access to everyone's personal records. If you work at a hospital, you don't have access to everyone's medical records. That's not how it works. If you want access, you have to request permission, you have to talk to a doctor, you have to talk to some staff, you have to sign this, you have to sign that, you have to sell your soul, basically, and then you get access. Everything at a hospital or a school is on a need-to-know basis, and every piece of data is audited and tracked and carefully controlled. Meanwhile, if you ask a developer, where's my data? They'll say, yeah, it's sitting in a database row somewhere. There's my phone number and my email and my credit card and my birth date and basically everything ever. It lives in a file next to everybody else's files. And that lives either on a server up who knows where, or it lives in a file on someone's laptop. I know we're all guilty of this at some point in our career, just making huge database dumps and sharing it amongst ourselves. That's what we do, we're developers. We just kind of wing it. But I learned as I started going into more details about how data is distributed, we've been developing bad habits. We've grown these bad habits about how we control, how we structure, and how we think about data. And security. Now, okay, we're 5 minutes into a talk about data. I already see some people falling asleep. Trust me, it's a little more interesting than that, but we have to get through this part first. We need to address the fact that we're treating data right now as strings and integers and timestamps and coordinates and objects just in a database somewhere. But that data is like precious to someone else, right? Just because to us it's just a whole bunch of stuff in a file doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. Contact info, personal life, attachment images, chat messages. There's a disconnect between how we developers think of data and what it actually means in the 21st century. We are fundamentally unprepared for the age of data. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to put all the blame on you guys or myself because it's not really your fault. It's not my fault either. We've developed a culture. We are used to this. Programming has always been a little fun and exciting, and we have less rules and less regulations than every other field ever. The barrier to entry to programming is so low that anyone can just jump into code whenever they want. Like, you don't need any education, you just go to a website, you start learning, right? That's the beauty of technology. Anybody can start when they want. But at the same time, the quality of our products vary very wildly. And it's hard to see from the finished product whether or not it was done right. Let's go back in time like 100 years. And here's the key problem. Humans were never meant to have this data on hand. Most people back in the day would have like temporal memory of about a week or maybe a year. The reason why cultures would develop interesting traditions was because traditions were how humans store information. But nowadays, people born after the turn of the millennium, all of their lives are on the internet. Overnight, during the last century, everything changed. Now, some people don't see the problem with storing everything on the internet. And if you think that way, that's fine. I'm not going to blame you. People don't really mind doing fun IQ tests on Facebook or putting up videos of their kid's first birthday on Twitter. Sharing experiences has always kind of been our thing as a species. So it's normal, and that's fine. But at a high level, that means suddenly our entire lives are up there, and that has consequences. It's a brand new age of data, and some people are feeling the pressure. It's already haunting a lot of us. I'm sure there's many more examples I can bring up. A fragment of data from our past, an experience we've had before, coming back to haunt us 20, 30, 50 years later. Now, okay, I want to be clear. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with this particular case, but I think that's the problem, right? We need to discuss about this. How are we going to handle this? 50 years down the line, if the next presidential candidate had a Twitter when they were 13, do we really want to know what they thought about their crushes at school and teachers? As a society, we haven't developed this yet. We are fundamentally unprepared for the age of data. I mean, I'm happy I didn't have Twitter when I was 13. That would be really embarrassing. So public shaming from public records are one thing. In the 21st century, you all know it goes one step further. Like this one. This is a simple chat message, and I'm sure we're aware that every piece of information we put on the web is analyzed or can be analyzed. Even the simplest chat message, the simplest photo, your location, your time. It means a lot. Computers are really good at extracting information from bits like this. And so you wind up with interesting conditions where software is able to figure out creepy things about you from how you behave. My favorite example of this process is browser fingerprinting. Here's the thing. You all know here, I'm sure you all know, that when you visit a website, the website knows your browser resolution, your browser version, your OS, and a few other interesting details like your fonts and your other stuff about your monitor, like your pixel density. Here's the cool thing. If I know the resolution of your monitor, I can guess your income level. If you have the latest iPhone, I will serve you different ads than if you had a brick phone Nokia from 1996. Now, there's the last spanner to jump into this works right here, AI. Because what I did was manual. I had to think about how to extract the information. AIs, you just teach them. The AIs learn really quickly. And I don't want to make this sound like it's a big boogeyman out there, but Google, Amazon, Facebook, all of them are investing huge chunks of money into this technology. So this is Watson, which belongs to IBM. It has a health AI, which basically merges everyone's collective knowledge about medicine and health from around the world, and it can do genuinely creepy things. There's AIs out there which can take a photo of you and guess if you'll be sick next week. There's an AI that can take a photo of you and see your income level in 10 years. Some people think it's a bit it's discrimination, right? Because we don't know how the AIs think. It's very likely they discriminate on us on things that if I told you that's how I think, you'd probably call me I'd be discriminating. But AIs don't do that because AIs have their own internal thought process. They're able to do things we are not. They're very, very, very good at identifying patterns. And one more time, just to be clear, I'm not making claims on what's right or what's wrong, but that we need to talk about it. In the book Hooked, Nariel brings up this quote, "Ubiquitous access to the web has created a more potentially addictive world. We haven't had enough time yet to develop the social antibodies to addictive new things. Unless we want to be canaries in the coal mine, for each new addiction, we have to figure out for ourselves what to avoid and how." Now, this book talks about addiction, among other things, but this applies to all things in the 21st century. Psychological tricks that make people visit the same website over and over. Data mining. Stuff leading into mental health issues. These are all problems that data has exacerbated in the last few years, which you don't have a solution to. There's a disconnect between how we think of data and what it means in the 21st century. Now, you'd think people would be ready for this. People would care. People would be careful about their data. They don't care. The vast majority of people don't care. People happily hand over their information because it makes sense, right? Because you get better Google searches, you have more accurate advertising, you get better results on YouTube. So to most people, it's okay, take my data, make my life better. They don't know yet what it means 10 years in the future. And that's why I say privacy is a battle we've already lost. Most people don't care. Mozilla tried to check. They did a little survey of how many people are worried about Facebook spying. As we all know, the whole Facebook thing was a big deal a few months ago. It turns out 3/4 of people said, yes, I don't really trust Facebook with my data. And that's a good number, but remember, Mozilla is a tech organization, and so their users are already tech friendly. And even then, 3/4 said they have a problem. There's still that 1/4 saying, it's probably fine. Again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying our expectations are different, and we're not ready. Now, from the people who said, yes, there's a problem with Facebook's data privacy, only 1/3 of them actually did anything about it. So we can't really trust people to worry about this. Let's believe in companies. Actually, let's not. Companies don't care. Data is their resource. Data is the resource of the 21st century. They want as much data as they can get. If they get hacked, it's just another company car accident. It's another write-off. It's another business expense. They want more data. We can't really trust companies to do this. So do we care? Do we developers, we who manage and control and collect this data, do we care about security and data privacy? How many prod DB dumps do you have on your laptop? I have like 3 on mine. Even if you try to play your part in controlling data privacy, what about all your dependencies and all the things we live on top of? Famously, just last month, 2 months ago, ESLint had a huge security flaw. Somebody managed to compromise a maintainer's account, and they slipped in a script inside the package, which would send people's npm-rc file, which contained secret tokens, and they sent them over the web. Now, this affected ESLint, and it affected npm. I'm sure most of us use either one of these in our work, and if you don't, there are dependencies, right? So stuff like Webpack uses ESLint internally. So next time you're doing a composer update or you're doing an update on npm or yarn, are you checking every dependency? Are you willing to trust every single layer underneath you for your customers' data? The interesting thing about this case was, even if you're a good developer, even if you stick to every good practice, this can still happen to you because it's a legitimate upgrade. You can follow Semver. You would update your packages regularly, to keep up to date. This would still affect you. Luckily, they shut it down fairly quick. Now, in response to this, NPM actually tweeted, a member of NPM staff tweeted on Twitter that for all we believed NPM being a large, good organization managing our dependencies, they're actually just a small team. And when you think about it, that's the case for everything. PHP is managed by a mailing list. There are PHP bugs out there right now that could compromise any of our products. Almost every open source software out there relies on these organizations, and yet we have so little defense. We have a responsibility here. We publish packages. There's this package, which managed to delete your user directory because it has a spare space in between the user and the next command. Some people actually installed it and got their user directories wiped. Developers just happily follow any Stack Overflow result they see. Let's be honest. We're frustrated, 2 hours trying to fix something, so they just go on Stack Overflow and copy the first quote they get. Bad things can happen just from a dependency update. Standard stuff, things we do every day. Just flies under the radar. We're inclined to think that open source is good. We believe in the wisdom of the masses, that together we'll fix all this stuff. We've grown too used to it. How often do you hear that? How often do we just willy-nilly do whatever we want because we don't really care that much, honestly? We're still joking around about it, but how would you feel if I said, yeah, let's just push all this person's medical records and here, let's have a look? In any other field, this is unacceptable. But somehow, because we're in technology, it's okay. We're fundamentally unprepared for the age of data. So last bastion, governments. Yeah, good luck with that. Bunch of grumpy old people. They don't really know about the internet. Series of tubes. They're all struggling to keep up. Now, okay, I know what you're thinking at this point, and let's get the elephant out of the way. GDPR. This talk isn't about GDPR for 3 reasons, and I really don't want to get into it. 1, I'm not from Europe, so I can't really advise you on that. 2, GDPR has a whole bunch of political stuff. It has punishment, and it has enforcement, which kind of pollutes the discussion. We don't really want to talk about what the correct fine is, because we just care about the privacy part. 3rd, GDPR isn't the end game. Just because you're GDPR compliant doesn't mean you care about people's data. You can be fully GDPR compliant and still royally screw over every single user. After all, everybody just presses accept. One more elephant, just kick out of the room real quick. Again, I'm not going to prescribe morality. I don't have a high ground here. I'm just one of you guys. I'm not going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. Just that we need to think about it, and we need to have a discussion about it. We're not here to discuss philosophy or morality, just that users should be able to make decisions, informed decisions. Famously, the best example of black and white morality is Google Maps. Google Maps uses user data. If everybody turned off GPS on their phones, it would grind to a halt. And I would have never imagined Google Maps existing in my lifetime. Like, really? Instant traffic maps worldwide? How does Google even afford that? Well, they don't, because we send them the data. And that's good, right? But if you think about it, location data and time data is really sensitive. I wouldn't want you guys to know where I've been every minute of every day and when I was there. That's really sensitive, but for Google Maps, it's okay, because it collectively helps us. So again, there's no morality high ground. So let's set aside some rules here, okay? Ground truth. We should be honest. We should tell people what we're doing with their stuff. 2, give them control. Let them decide for themselves. Again, because I'm not going to prescribe morality, we should let people decide on them for themselves. And remember though, especially if your product targets lay people, we have to educate them. We have to proactively protect. We have to assume they don't understand, because all this is way too far ahead. Most people don't understand. It's our job. It's our job because we maintain their data. We do the service for them. It's on us to protect them. I want you to remember here that security is tightly connected to privacy. Once data is out, it's out of there forever, for good. Once data is published, it's basically just published for good. So I hope at this point, we've gone through enough about theory about data, and you're probably bored of hearing me say the word data. So let's get into some practical advice, shall we? How do you start fixing things today? Tip number 1, start building checklists and kill switch for your company and your products. Basically, every procedure you do, may it be a push, maybe it shutting down a server, should have a checklist and a procedure. This applies to every service, whatever you do. Make a checklist for shutdown. Make a checklist for upgrading. Make a checklist for verifying a breach. Make a checklist for removing sensitive data. If somebody calls you and says, hey, there's some important data, we need to get rid of it, do you have a procedure? Do you have a way in 5 minutes to say, okay, we'll deal with it? I have a good example for this one. There's currently some kerfuffles in Bangladesh, to say the least. And during some rioting in the streets, somebody posted an address to Facebook that led police and protesters to clash, and some people died. People tried to tell Facebook, but Facebook doesn't have a mechanism to quickly get rid of a piece of information. And I could see why, because it's kind of like censorship, right? Like you don't really want that to be built in. But what about your stuff? If somebody posts a comment somewhere and it contains sensitive information, may it be somebody's secret key, may it be a picture or some other piece of information which nobody wants to be leaked, do you have a way to get rid of it? Do you have a way to quickly, in 1 minute, take it down before it hurts other people? Build a checklist and build procedures for that. Famously, NASA has a lot of checklists, right? Because they launch spaceships. And so they're ready. Whenever something goes wrong, they have every member of staff knows what to do. When Apollo 13 had a leak, every member of staff did not panic. Everybody went to their station and they did a thing. Now imagine in your office if you found somebody logged in as root on prod. Are you going to run around as headless chickens, or are we going to have a plan? Always prepare a plan. Another great example, whenever an airline has an engine shutdown, when a plane is descending and an engine shuts down, there's only a very limited window when the pilots can try to restart the engine. And so the pilots need to decide, are we going to try to restart, or are we going to ditch? And for that, they have a checklist. They have like a giant thick book. It's like above the cockpit there. And it tells them, okay, turn this on, turn that on, try to start. There's a very properly built checklist for that one purpose. We should have the same thing. We should be able to respond in times of crisis what we do. Make sure every employee can work at maximum efficiency. Now, as an example, I have a checklist for making a talk. This laptop has sensitive consumer data on it, so if I'm presenting, I have a checklist to secure it before I went up on stage. If you've ever had the embarrassment of Docker trying to update during a presentation, you'll know why you want one of these. Here's a checklist for a data breach procedure. It's a simplified one, and I think everybody can use one of these. You take down your production server, you isolate all of your backups, because remember, you don't want people tampering with your backups. You identify affected users, you contact them through a mailing API, and you reset them. If you guys get a breach, are you ready for this? Can you do this in 5 minutes? Is this set up? You'll notice some of these need extra work. You need to make a bulk email API, you need a way to block people's accounts. That's what checklists are great for. When you're making the checklist, you realize, okay, it turns out we need a way to block accounts, just in case this happens. You'll notice that when a big security breach happens somewhere, the company will do one of two things. The company will either be, well, that happened, or they'll be, okay, here's who's been affected, we're locking down all of your accounts, you've reset all your passwords, we're so sorry this data is out. Which company are you going to be when that happens? Not if, but when. If you're interested in checklists, check out this book. It's really good. It talks about how you can use checklists day to day, not even in tech, but in general, to be more precise and more careful about everything we do. So checklists will tell you how to react when something bad happens. Next, you need logging, because logging will tell you what happened. You use the checklist to react, and then you go back in time and see what happened. Of course, the logs won't recover lost data, but it'll help detect what happened, and it'll tell you who was affected, and it'll tell you exactly which information was lost. So if you're using a logging service, here I'm going to use Hindsight, our own logging service. We're setting it up just now. You'll see that you can backtrack and see everything that's happened on your server. Regardless of what software you use, you should be able to do this. You should be able to see every request coming in, and if they're a problem. Now, when you're seeing that, then you use your logs to see who it affects, what it affected, and how they got there. Again, you use the checklist to figure out what to do, then you use your logs to figure out what happened. You can run a postmortem, figure out how did we get here. You never want to be in a position where, guys, prod is down, it's hacked, MySQL is lost, we don't know how. We've lost everything, logs are dead. This is a good reason you want to use a third-party logging service, because then, even if they break your system, they don't break the third party. If you run an app without logging, how are you going to tell people what you did wrong? How are you going to tell your own staff? How are you going to sleep that night? Moving on, you also want to try and figure out who did it, what devices they used, and so in the future, you can try to tamper-proof yourself. You can try to figure out what our vulnerabilities were, what led to it. Now, I do need to warn you, logging is a third party, so if you're going to log, you need to be careful. You need to make sure you censor passwords, you censor tokens, anything you don't want going there, redact that out. You can use any logging service, but please, 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 I've said this last year, I'm going to say it again, make sure you have a logging service to help you figure out what went wrong. Next up, watch for unintended data access. This is my favorite one. If you look back, again, what I consider personal to me is different from what you consider personal. I don't mind my email being public, because I'm a developer, my email is on my site. But other people might mind, right? And sometimes there's pieces of information which are easy to slip by. One of the most obvious are password resets. Most websites, if you try to reset a password, will just tell you, oh, we found your account, we'll send you an email. But that's information right there. We just told the user, oh, there is an account with that email. Now, if this was like a Laravel forum, that's probably fine. There's no shame in saying I'm a Laravel forum user. But if you're anywhere on the fringes of the internet, it falls apart pretty quickly. So you should try to rephrase it and try to make it sound more like, if there is an account, what do you do? Now, this is an obvious example, but again, invite codes, group invites, invite emails. Be very careful. Another common one is people around me, or you're inviting your friends through LinkedIn or whatever. Be very careful when your data is leaking information, which you might not intend to originally. Here's another thing here. A lot of websites will say, oh, you've been hacked, but don't worry, your passwords were hashed. Don't worry, your passwords are fine, your credit cards weren't affected. But is it though? Because your emails are out now. Your name and your email is out. And there have been websites where there's been a breach, and they're like, it's fine, passwords are fine, but it's not fine. Because sometimes emails and names are sensitive. Talking about names, here's my favorite one. If you have a common name, what websites will try to do sometimes to anonymize you is they'll shorten your last name, right? So if your name is Chris, this is pretty anonymous. But if your name is kind of unique, suddenly it doesn't really work, does it? Again, think about your expectations. Does it work for everybody? Is it really anonymizing if you get rid of the last name? If I have a super specific first name, it kind of falls apart. Location data. When we track locations or time on our apps, it's really easy for us to track in really high granularity. It's really easy for us to track up to like 9 digits of precision for GPS. Do we need that? Do we want to show that Google pin showing exactly the house this person tweeted from? Or can we just say somewhere around there? Same goes for timestamps. Do we need to say 3 hours, 4 minutes, 22 seconds, 0.392 milliseconds ago? That's sensitive information. That might mean a lot to people. So be careful and consider the accuracy you actually really need. My previous project, we were doing a big refactor from, had, I think, 12 digits of accuracy in our coordinates. And that meant when people signed up, their phones would send the coordinate set to the API, right? Because it was so accurate, you could see literally the toilet seat people were sending it from. And then what you do, the fun part is there's like a find people near me button, right? And it would have pins like where people were when they last joined the site. And you can see all these people in their bathrooms joining the site. And it's like, do we need that? Is that really a feature our users want? Be careful with that. One more time, just to reiterate, do not assume. Listen to your users, see what's sensitive to them, see what's not. I once built a system for a company in China. Okay, I need to be very careful with this. China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan have a very interesting relationship. But some people there are really touchy about photos because there's a whole democracy thing going on, which, again, I'm not going to go into. But as a result, some people don't really want their faces online. Some people don't want their phone numbers. Some people don't want to be seen in a crowd. Just because here it's okay doesn't mean it's okay halfway around the world. If you're a celebrity, your email is probably really sensitive. And again, because your email is probably shared, your celebrity email is probably also like your iCloud email. Just saying. If you're a journalist, then maybe you don't want your address to be known because who knows who will go after you. If you're a student, and you're a minor especially, that's a whole new rabbit hole to get into. So let's do a little thought experiment. Would you consider the pairing of an email and a name to be private? This is a common format, right? You see this a lot in emails and mailing lists. It's common. But I'm sure a lot of people would also think, are you really okay with that? Are you really okay with putting up a mail to link on the web? Is that all right? I'm okay with it. I'm a developer. My email's already everywhere. But a lot of people would have problems with this. At the same time, especially kids these days, they don't care about email either. But they are sensitive about, for example, their super secret Twitter account or their super secret Instagram account. Be careful. Listen to your users. Moving on. Tell me who'll see my data and why. Those of you who saw me last year would probably remember the mantra, why, and then how. You start with why you need the information, then you tell me how you need it. Most websites will just hide this in a privacy policy, and they'll make you press OK before you enter it. But why do we have to hide it? Why is a privacy document taboo? Why are we not talking about this? I don't even understand why this is legal sometimes. Make it obvious. If you want a phone number, if it's private, then you have to say who has access. And why. Again, why. You open up with the why those people have access, and then you go into the how. If this is open to an API, you should say so. If it's open to the public, you should say so. Get the people to trust us, and they'll trust us with more data. Always, always, always start with telling people what will be visible and what will not be. Again, we must build trust. That's our job. If you're doing, for example, location data, this is often a public field, you have to say how accurate. Again, because is it city level? And again, think, your product, does your product need city level accuracy? Is province level enough? Is country level enough? Does it matter? If you want a postcode, why do you want a postcode? Are you going to send me stuff? Are you actually just storing it for, for invoicing, for example? Always, always, always tell your user. Now, at this point, here's a problem. We tend to think of data as either public or private, right? Thing is, public's ambiguous when you think about it really hard. The word public and the word private is kind of ambiguous. For example, hash passwords are actually private, theoretically. Only I should know what a hash password means, what the actual password is. And then there's email addresses, which anybody who can open a database would have access to. Is that, it's not really private anymore, is it? Because somebody else can see it. For shared files, for example, I might share with a friend. And now you have access, I have access. Is it still private? It's private-ish. There's stuff where you have a blacklist, where, for example, the online status on, for example, Slack. If you're not logged in, you can't see it. Is that public? Is that private? If you write a blog post, the web can see it. I'm sure most of us would say that's public, but there's one more level underneath that, which is APIs. If it's open to the web, it's open to APIs. If crawlers can get to it, that's a whole new level of public. There's a spectrum of public. There's private as in super, super encrypted private. There's public as in literally open to the world. So when you say this data is protected, you have to tell your user exactly, is it super protected? Is it only somewhere in the middle? Let's keep going. Tell me what's on my record. What do you have on me that I can't get rid of later on? Obviously, by default, you should let people change and delete and modify their data. But once in a while, there's something you need to keep on the low for a long time. For example, records or transactions. Try to avoid implicit identifiables here. For example, invite codes. Those are identifiable. And a lot of times, you can't change them. Think very carefully about how you can do a little breadcrumb trail back to the original user. How many of you have regretted a username from a long time ago? It's probably a funny username when you're 13, but it won't be as funny when you're running for president 50 years down the line. This is actually funny because I was doing a bit of research on usernames, and it turns out younger people tend to not care about usernames as much. If you use Discord, if you're on all these newfangled sites, usernames usually aren't static anymore. You can have overlapping usernames. There's usually a separate concept of an ID. And so kids often don't understand that on some websites, usernames are permanent. I understand, ideally, you should be able to change your username on every website, ideally. But it's a bit of extra work. Sometimes people use usernames as identifiable information. I get that. If you have saved searches, for example, let people act on it. Let people clear their history. I travel between these cities all the time, so I don't mind this being on Booking.com. But if I'm planning a super special secret honeymoon, theoretically, I would want to be able to hide it. This happens in a lot of places. Slack. If you use Slack, Slack contains a history of the people you mentioned often. That's probably okay. But then think about it. Say you're in a company Slack and you're secretly talking to a bunch of people about, making another company. You don't want that history to be there. And on Slack, as I understand it, there's no real way to change that. So think about that. Think about all the information which you quietly aggregate under the hood. and you can't do anything about. As a rule of thumb, everything should be hideable. Everything. Limit employee access to only what they need to know. Now, this is one of the first ones that people get rid of really quickly, especially when the company is new and they're like, we're going to be agile, we're going to try all this new stuff. Let's not waste time trying to set up who's who. Everybody has prod access, everybody has staging access, everybody has every single key. I mean, let's be honest, most of us have probably had a production private key land in Slack at some point. I'm not naming names. Famously, when the US was developing the Manhattan Project, leading up to nuclear weapons in World War II, they actually set up entire customized cities where every employee and every person in the cities only knew their job. There were people whose entire job is to press one button, whose entire job is to look at one particular list. They do that because it's super top secret, obviously, and also because it reduces liability. When employees don't have access to everything, they feel safer because they can no longer royally screw up production. Think carefully about who needs access to what and which information is public and which is not. Make sure each of your employees know their limits and who is responsible for what. Of course, we don't need military-level secrecy, but it works for them, so it should work for us, right? Again, keyword, reduce risk, reduce liability. Let your employees sleep a bit safer, knowing they won't be blamed for production going down, and it's easier for you in the future to keep things under lock. You wouldn't have 50 keys for your house's front door. You'd keep it tight down. And of course, that does mean when somebody leaves, revoke their keys. Don't wait. Again, you should have a protocol for that. You should have a checklist. Okay, someone is leaving, revoke their key, revoke their VPN, revoke all of their access. There should be a checklist, so you never think about, did we properly let go of that person? Did we remove their key? When somebody leaves, go through the checklist, tap, 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 get them out of the way. Do not skimp out on this. I could talk about this for years. Like, there's so much stuff. I'll just do a quick rundown on these. Have a protocol for self-harming behavior. If somebody is thinking about harming themselves on your service, have a checklist, have a protocol. Reach out to them, help them, offer them help, or at least see what you can do. If bullying is a huge problem on online communities these days, does your company have a solution? If someone is being threatened through your platform, do you have a solution? Do you know how to react to it? Do you know how to help your users? Let me log out from my other devices. There are a lot of people who use internet through libraries or borrow people's phones. How many data breaches have been basically somebody forgetting to log out of Facebook? If you use API tokens, that's super easy to do. There's no reason not to let people log out remotely. Usability testing for hidden data leaks. I've mentioned that one. Talk to your users and see, is there any information you rather would keep down low? Is there anything you want to hide on the website? Talk to your users, have feedback, and reply to their feedback. Have audits, obviously, and make sure your privacy policies are written sanely. Write them for humans, not for machines and not for lawyers. I understand you want to write for lawyers, but make a nice human privacy document. Let your users feel comfortable. You wouldn't walk into a hotel if they had to make you sign a 500-page document. Just because it's a PDF file doesn't mean we shouldn't care. Audit your dependencies. This is really weird for me because I'm going to tell you, if you're doing a Composer update, check. Don't just Composer update and push. Look at all your packages. Make sure you don't have any packages you're not using. Look at the versions you're updating. And there's a reason why a lot of people say don't use bleeding edge. Don't use the latest version until a couple months down the line. There's a reason for it. Be careful. It's not hard to sneak in a piece of code into PHP to send all of your customers' data to some attacker somewhere. I'm going to keep this short, and I'm just going to leave you with a simple message here. Our users' data is more than we think it is. We can no longer think of bits and bytes. We can no longer think of just stuff sitting on a cloud, on a server somewhere. That's people's information. And I plead to all of you to be careful with it. Because in this new weird world of data, that's precious to someone. We have to rethink it. People trust us on this. People trust us to take care of their stuff. It's on us. It's our responsibility. I said several times that we're not prepared for the age of data. We are prepared. We just have to start. We have to start caring about this stuff. We are the heralds. We are on the bleeding edge of technology. It's on us. There's no reason for any of us to skimp out on how we think about privacy and security. As time continues, you'll see more and more news, more and more interesting things on the web about this being breached, that being lost, this photo leaking to the internet. It's only going to get worse. We're in tech because we get to be at the forefront of evolution. It's on us. It's our responsibility. Remember, good programmers care about people. Good people care about people. We have to rethink our responsibility as bearers of the great resource of the 21st century. We build these things. We have to play our part. Thank you.